Welcome to the first in a series of video tutorials about how to use Datascape. For this first tutorial we're going to look at one of the worked examples that ships with Datascape, and that's about plotting survey data in 3D. Here's the dataset we're going to use. It's in OpenOffice here, but it's just a straightforward CSV file. We've got about 500 rows of data, and it's simulating a fairly typical sort of survey questionnaire that you might do at school. And the columns we've got in here are, first of all, age, numeric value, gender, height in centimeters, weight in kilograms, colour of eyes, and colour of hair. So the first thing we need to do is actually load that up into Datascape. As I say, this is a worked example. It is already loaded into the database in Datascape itself, but we're just going to show you how we go through that import process, just so you're aware of what happens. So I'm going to launch the Datascape import tool. And first thing I need to do is just point it to the database I'm using. So this is localhost, which is the standard one that ships for Datascape. So that's the MySQL database running on your own machine. So next I go to the Import Spreadsheet tab, and I just need to browse on to the dataset that I'm going to import. So let's go into the examples folder here, and here we have survey, and here we have the survey data, and I'm just going to open that up. We can tell the system that we have a heading row, so just going to tick that so we don't need to remember what all the columns are, and click on Analyze. And here we find that Datascape's identified each of the columns and given each of them the name that we had in the spreadsheet. There's also a description field if you want to add any more information. Then all we need to do is just set the age, the types for some of them. So age we can set as float because that was decimal. It's already worked out that gender is a text value. Height, that was just in centimeters, so we can set that to integer. Weight, likewise, that was in whole kilos, so we can set that to integer. If in doubt with numbers, set them to float. Colour of eyes, colour of hair are already set to text fields. You'll also notice that by default, Datascape will add an ID column, so an ID field for every single row. It's a good idea normally just to leave that in place, so you have got a unique key if you need it. And then I go across to import, give it this particular dataset name, just so I don't overwrite what's already there. I'm just going to call this test of survey data. Ignore the network settings associated dataset for the moment. Good idea to set stop on errors, so if there are any problems with the dataset you pick those up as they come in, and then click on import dataset. And you'll see you get a count of the number of records that are being imported and whether or not any are ignored. And just coming up to our 500, and that's our 500 rows of data imported. If we want to make sure that data's there, just go to the Dataset tab and click on View, and you'll see here we are, test of survey data. So that's the data that we just imported. So now we're going to launch Datascape. I'm going to use the Community Edition here. We've got a choice about running windowed or full screen. I'm going to run it windowed and click on play. And there's Datascape loaded up, ready for use. We're going to make use of one of the existing templates that ships with Datascape. So that's just a simple set of X, Y, Z axis bars. So we're just going to click on that. And here's my axes bars. You can see if we start, just press the space bar so we can move around. We're in a very large empty space, which is where we're going to be putting our data. And in the center of that, centered at 0, 0, 0, we have a set of axis bars. And by default, they're extending out to 100 in all directions. To bring our data in, just press the space bar to go back into edit mode. We're going to load the data unattached. This means the data gets loaded around the 0, 0, 0 point. So click on load unattached data. Here's all the various data sets I've got loaded into the system. You can see the one we just brought in there, test of survey data, so might as well use that. And it says here that we haven't got a mapping already created, so we're going to click on create new mapping. And this is the real guts of Datascapes. This is where we need to assign the values that we want from the data to the mapping itself, or to the plot. If we click on the double arrows here, it shows us what fields we have available to us. So for the ID property, I'm just going to use the ID field. For X, let's assign that to age. So again, just click on age. You'll notice there's a little icon here we're going to use later on to actually show us the ranges of values. But for the moment, let's just bring it in as is. So that's age. For the Y, which is the vertical, we're going to use height. And for Z, which is usually into the screen, we're going to use weight. And initially we're just going to keep things very simple, so we're just going to set shape to sphere, if I can spell that correctly. And we're going to set colour to red. And we're going to set size to 1. And we'll save that off as our default mapping. It warns us. And then click on continue. And we should find our data is now in the space. Problem is, of course, our data is coming way off the axes, because the axes themselves are each scaled to 100. If we go back and look at our data, so click on the data set, go back to edit data mapping, then you find the eye icon here actually tells us what the range of the values are. So age, we've got from 15 to 20 and 55 unique values. For height, we've got 141 to 207 in 66 discrete values. So what we need to do in this particular case is we just need to change the values of the axes so as to get the data to appear slightly more central. So what we're going to do here is click on scene, and here I've got my X, Y and Z axes. So if I just click first of all on the X-axis, you might just be able to notice it's just moving slightly, so that we know that's the axis we're dealing with. And if I scroll down here to edit ranges, and here we can see the range is currently running between minus 100 and plus 100. What we're going to do, we've got a fairly narrow range of ages, so we're going to set this from 15 and have that go through to 21. And that's right, save that. And what we're then going to do is go onto the y-axis. And with the y-axis, again, same thing, go to edit ranges, and I'm going to want to move the y-axis range. In this case, again, you see it highlighting. I'm going to want to range that from a maximum of 200 and a minimum of 100. And finally on the z-axis, I want to set a range there, minimum of 0. And a maximum of 100. Okay, so we've now got our axes set up correctly. You'll notice the data itself hasn't moved. The reason for that is we loaded the data in what we called unattached. So that means it's not actually attached to the axes itself yet. So what we need to do is to make that attachment. So to do that, just go to the data, choose the data set, and here we've got map to objects. And all I'm going to do here is choose the X axes, or the X property rather, the data, and then click on the bar that I want to attach that to. So just click on that. If I just zoom in a bit. And OK to that. And take the y-axis. Again, click on the bar. And finally take the z-axis. And you'll see here the data is beginning to sort itself out as I choose each of those values. Okay, so what we've now done is we've now actually got our data mapped onto the various axes, and you see it's now spreading out quite nicely in the space. Just to prove this, if I just go back to scene, and let's just choose the x-axis, and if we now change the value of one of these ranges, so if we now say let's change this from up to 31, then you see the data immediately starts moving. So just put it back to 21. So we know what we're doing. The next thing we might want to do is take advantage of the colouring. Everybody at the moment is all coloured in red. So I'm going to go to Data and go back to Edit the Mapping. And here my colour is set to red. We don't want that. So what we're going to do is we're going to choose the colour of hair. It seems to be the sensible option to go for. So let's go to colour of hair. Click on OK. Again, if we look at what that data is, we've got 4 unique values: red, brown, blonde and ginger. So what we do is we use a translation table and we can autofill that. What that does, it takes the values which are in the data, which Datascape doesn't understand, it doesn't necessarily see them as colours, and it maps them randomly to colours in the system. Some of them are fairly sensible, like it's mapped red to red, but the others don't make too much sense because they are just random. So let's map blonde to a yellow, we'll map brown very sensibly to brown, and we'll map ginger to orange. And we can name that if we want to, and click on OK, and reload that. And here we see each of the points have now changed to the new colour. So far we've made use of X, Y and Z attributes and the colour. What we're now going to do is make use of shape. So again, we're just going to press spacebar, drop back into edit mode, choose the dataset, go to edit data mapping. And here at the moment we've got shape as sphere. What we want to do is make that depend on one of the variables within the dataset. And what we'll do is make that based around gender. So click on gender. OK. If we look at gender, then we can see we've only got 2 values in here, male and female. So that's ideal to actually map onto a shape. So what we're going to do is click on the Translation Assist button. And this brings up the translation table, same as we had for colour. We're going to ask it to autofill this. So again, it just randomly chooses some shapes from the library. But what we'll do is change those to something a little bit more sensible possibly. So what we'll do is we'll put sphere down for female, and we'll put cube down for male, and we'll have cone as a default, which is quite useful to have a default that's different to everything else. That way you can pick up if you've got any errors in the data. And click on OK on that. And we can save that and then reload the data. So now we can see in our data we've got our cubes representing the male respondents, and we've got the spheres representing the female respondents. One of the things we often find inside a virtual environment like this is that it's quite hard to actually spot where the axes are. Here we've actually got a relatively small data set and a relatively small set of axes, so we can actually stay outside the axes quite easily. However, with bigger data sets, often you'll find the axes are actually a long way away from where you are. So it's quite useful to actually be able to understand when you're looking at a data point whereabouts it sits relevant to the axis. So there's a number of ways we can do that. So what I'm going to do is drop back into edit mode, bring up the data again. And what we'll notice here is we've got a simple and an advanced option. The simple is what we've been using so far, which just shows us the most common properties. One of those is hover text, so that's the text that we get when we actually hover over an item. We can put any text we want in here. We can just put fixed text, or else we can bring in a value. If it's a text value, we don't really have any sort of proper text values here, but we could have colorize, I suppose. Then if you want to, you can just add that in. Just let me clear that. You could add that in, click on colorize, and if we reload now, before we can make use of that, we just need to activate the data set. What that means is that actually it'll now respond to hoverovers. So actually you now see as we actually hover over each of these points, we're actually getting the colour of eyes. So we could leave it like that. What I want to do in fact is just key it back into the identities of the individual respondents. One of the issues here is we're expecting a text field, and obviously the ID is a numeric field. So what we just need to do is use the concat command and then pick up the ID field. And you'll notice here the concat command is there on the helper if you need it. OK, and reload. And what we now find is we actually get the ID as we hover over. If we want to remind ourselves what that value is, so we can just add a piece of text. So what we're going to do is do concat ID equals and then the ID. So that lets us say we can put any information in that text. What we also want to do is give ourselves some idea of where we are within the three-dimensional axes. So you'll notice here under the Advanced tab we've got X, Y and Z axis labels. So the X-axis, you'll remember that we set to age. So what I'm going to do here is simple concat and then age equals, and then pick up age. And we're going to do similar things with the others, so I'll just copy and paste those. So the y-axis was set to height. And what we might do is just remind ourselves what the units were for that. And the z-axis was set to weight. And it was in kilograms. And again, we can save that and reload it. Okay, so what we now find actually as I hover over a point, not only do we get that central hover text that we gave it, but it also tells us the X, Y and Z values as well. So we've got all that information. So this means it doesn't matter where we are as we're touring around the data set, and if we sort of lost sense of where the main axes are or lost visibility of those main axes, all we need to do is just hover over and we can see whereabouts the point sits. One other thing you'll notice is actually in the background we've put markers in the distance, so we can see actually here we're looking down the x-axis in a negative direction, we're looking down the z-axis in a positive direction, and also if we look up into the sky we've got y positive up there as well. So again, these are all things to help you keep your orientation as you begin to move through larger data sets. So just to finish off, we probably want to save the work that we've done. To do that, just go up to File, there's a Save As button, and then we can type in the name of the workspace that we want to save, and it'll warn us if we're overwriting, and save the workspace. One point on the data mappings. Data mappings, if you like, exist in two forms. One is linked to the dataset itself, not linked to a dataset. And the second one is actually linked to the workspace. So if we want to make sure we've got this particular mapping saved purely for this workspace, so it can't be overwritten by anybody else, then after we've created the workspace, it's a good idea to save the mapping as well. And reload. So hopefully that gives you an understanding of the very basics of just how you bring a simple data set into Datascape and how you can use the mappings. The next of these tutorials will look at how to use geographic and time-based data to create what's called a time on the stick visualization. Thank you.